Among all attachment styles, dismissive avoidants demonstrate the highest rates of infidelity, and understanding why requires examining the complex psychological architecture that defines their approach to intimacy, vulnerability, and connection. Their pattern of cheating differs fundamentally from other attachment styles. It's not driven by insecure need for validation, revenge against perceived abandonment, or impulsive lack of self-control. Instead, dismissive avoidant infidelity emerges from their core defensive structure, serving specific psychological functions that protect their fragile sense of autonomy while managing their terror of emotional dependence. This exploration reveals how their cheating operates as a sophisticated defense mechanism rather than simple moral failing, though the destruction it causes remains devastating regardless of its psychological origins. Their core terror of emotional dependence drives fragmentation. The dismissive avoidance relationship with infidelity begins with their foundational psychological wound, an overwhelming fear of depending on anyone for emotional sustenance or well-being. Their nervous system interprets emotional dependence as existential threat, triggering defensive responses designed to prevent any single person from gaining too much importance in their internal world. This terror doesn't emerge from nowhere. It typically originates in early experiences where depending on caregivers proved dangerous, disappointing, or painful. When a dismissive avoidant finds themselves in a relationship that begins activating genuine feelings of attachment, their psychological alarm system goes into overdrive. They start experiencing their partner as someone they could depend on, someone whose presence matters, someone whose absence might hurt. This realization triggers panic at an unconscious level. They're losing the emotional self-sufficiency they've built their entire identity around. Cheating emerges as a solution to this panic. By maintaining connections with multiple people, they ensure that no single person becomes too important. They're distributing their emotional eggs across multiple baskets, preventing the terrifying scenario where one person holds the power to hurt them through abandonment or withdrawal. Each additional connection dilutes the significance of their primary relationship, keeping their partner at a psychologically manageable level of importance. Their nervous system experiences relief through this fragmentation. When they know they have other options, other connections, other sources of validation or intimacy available, they can tolerate the vulnerability of their primary relationship without feeling consumed by it. The infidelity functions as a pressure valve, releasing the building anxiety that accompanies deepening attachment. This pattern often intensifies precisely when the relationship becomes most intimate. The dismissive avoidant might cheat immediately after particularly vulnerable moments, after saying "I love you" for the first time, after meeting their partner's family, after discussions about future commitment. These milestone moments trigger their fear response, and infidelity becomes their method of psychologically retreating while physically remaining in the relationship. The tragic irony is that this strategy prevents the very thing that could heal their attachment wounds: sustained, secure intimacy with someone trustworthy. By refusing to put all their emotional investment in one person, they never discover whether their fears are justified. They never learn that dependence doesn't equal destruction, that vulnerability can be safe, that relying on someone doesn't necessarily lead to devastating abandonment. Their idealized self-image requires constant external validation. The second major driver of dismissive avoidant infidelity stems from their relationship with self-worth and validation. Despite appearing supremely confident and self-assured, dismissive avoidants often harbor deep insecurities about their lovability and value that they've learned to mask through projection of strength and independence. Their defensive structure includes an idealized self-image that requires constant reinforcement from external sources to maintain. Their psychology has learned that internal validation, simply believing in their own worth, feels too vulnerable and unstable. Self-esteem that comes from within can be questioned, doubted, or undermined. But external validation, being desired, pursued, chosen by others, provides concrete evidence that's harder to dismiss. Each person who wants them becomes proof of their value, a trophy in their psychological collection that wards off their hidden fears of inadequacy. Cheating provides a steady stream of this external validation. New connections offer the intoxicating experience of being desired by someone who doesn't yet know their flaws, someone who sees only their carefully curated persona, someone who reflects back an idealized version of themselves. This reflection feels more real and trustworthy than any internal sense of worth could ever feel. The dismissive avoidant often seeks this validation precisely when their primary relationship becomes comfortable and established. The initial chase has ended, the conquest is complete, and their partner knows them well enough to see through some of their defenses. This familiarity, while potentially deepening intimacy, also threatens their idealized self-image. Their partner knows they're not perfect, sees their vulnerabilities, witnesses their weaknesses. New connections restore the idealized reflection. With someone new, they can be whoever they need to be to feel worthy again. They can hide their insecurities, showcase their strengths, and receive admiration uncomplicated by real knowledge of who they are beneath the surface. This superficial validation paradoxically feels more affirming than the deeper acceptance their partner offers, because it doesn't require them to confront their actual self. The pattern often manifests as serial micro-relationships, flirtations, emotional affairs, or physical encounters that remain surface level. The dismissive avoidant doesn't typically leave their primary relationship for these other connections. They're not seeking to replace their partner, but rather to supplement the validation their partner provides with fresh sources that haven't seen behind the mask. This validation seeking through infidelity creates a vicious cycle. The more they cheat, the more they erode genuine intimacy in their primary relationship. As that intimacy erodes, they feel less truly seen and accepted, increasing their need for external validation from new sources. They're destroying the very thing that could provide sustainable self-worth, a relationship where they're known and loved anyway, in favor of temporary boosts from people who don't actually know them at all. They compartmentalize to avoid integration of their full self. The third psychological driver involves the dismissive avoidant's sophisticated ability to compartmentalize different aspects of themselves and their relationships. This compartmentalization serves a crucial defensive function. It prevents anyone from accessing their complete, authentic self, thereby protecting them from the vulnerability of being fully known. Their psychology divides intimacy into separate categories that they distribute across multiple people. One person might receive their intellectual intimacy, deep conversations about ideas, philosophy, or interests. Another receives physical intimacy without emotional depth. A third might get emotional vulnerability in carefully controlled doses. By fragmenting themselves across multiple connections, they ensure that no single person can claim they truly know the dismissive avoidant completely. This fragmentation protects them from their core fear, that if someone fully knew them, truly saw all aspects of their personality including their weaknesses and wounds, they would inevitably be rejected. Better to show different parts to different people, maintaining control over what each person sees, than to risk the devastation of complete disclosure followed by abandonment. Cheating facilitates this compartmentalization perfectly. Their primary partner might see their domestic self, their provider self, their stable relationship self, but their affair partner might access their passionate self, their adventurous self, their unencumbered self. Neither person sees the full picture, and this division creates psychological safety for the dismissive avoidant. The compartmentalization extends to how they emotionally process these different connections. They maintain mental separation between their primary relationship and their infidelities, experiencing them as distinct and unrelated rather than recognizing them as parts of a unified whole. This psychological splitting allows them to avoid the cognitive dissonance that would arise if they fully acknowledged they're betraying someone who trusts them. Their nervous system actually experiences these separate connections as occurring in parallel universes rather than within the same life. When they're with their partner, the other connections don't feel real or relevant. When they're with affair partners, their primary relationship exists in a different psychological compartment. This splitting prevents guilt and internal conflict from emerging strongly enough to change their behavior. The tragedy of this compartmentalization is that it prevents them from ever experiencing whole-person intimacy, being completely known, including their contradictions and complexities, and being accepted anyway. They're so busy protecting themselves from rejection through fragmentation that they never discover whether acceptance of their whole self is possible. Their relationship to commitment is fundamentally compromised. The fourth driver of dismissive avoidant infidelity involves their deeply ambivalent and often hostile relationship with commitment itself. While they might enter relationships and even agree to monogamous commitment verbally, their psychology never fully accepts the constraints and obligations that commitment entails. They experience commitment as a threat to their autonomy, a cage limiting their freedom, a surrender of self that feels intolerable. Their nervous system interprets commitment as loss rather than gain. While others might experience commitment as gaining security, partnership, and deeper connection, dismissive avoidants experience it as losing options, sacrificing freedom, and accepting unwanted obligations. The more formal or serious the commitment becomes, the more trapped they feel, triggering desperate behaviors designed to assert their independence. Cheating becomes their method of maintaining internal freedom within external commitment. They can appear committed to their partner while secretly preserving their sense of autonomy through connections with others. The secret itself, the fact that their partner doesn't know about these other involvements, creates psychological space they require to tolerate the committed relationship. This pattern often intensifies around commitment milestones. Dismissive avoidants may be most likely to cheat right before or after getting engaged, moving in together, getting married, or having children. These escalations in commitment trigger their panic response, and infidelity provides relief by asserting that despite external appearances, they haven't truly surrendered their autonomy. Their psychology frames commitment as a performance rather than a genuine state of being. They're playing the role of committed partner while maintaining internal freedom through their secret connections. This allows them to receive the benefits of commitment, partnership, companionship, social legitimacy, without experiencing the psychological constraints they associate with truly belonging to someone. The dismissive avoidant often justifies this behavior through various rationalizations. They might tell themselves that what their partner doesn't know won't hurt them, that monogamy is an artificial social construct they don't truly believe in, or that their partner isn't meeting all their needs, so seeking fulfillment elsewhere is reasonable. These justifications allow them to cheat without confronting the ethical implications of their betrayal. Beneath these rationalizations lies a simpler truth. They agreed to commitment they never intended to honor fully, because some part of them wants relationship, while another part violently rejects the constraints relationship requires. Rather than resolving this internal conflict through honest communication or choosing relationships that match their actual capacity for commitment, they attempt to have it both ways through deception. They use infidelity as preemptive strike against abandonment. The fifth psychological driver involves a paradoxical defensive strategy where dismissive avoidants cheat as protection against the abandonment they unconsciously fear. Despite their conscious identification with independence and self-sufficiency, their attachment system still carries primal abandonment wounds that influence their behavior in ways they don't consciously recognize. Their psychology operates from a deeply buried belief that everyone will eventually leave, that they're fundamentally unlovable at their core, that abandonment is inevitable. Rather than risk the devastation of being left by someone they've allowed themselves to depend on, they preemptively create conditions that either prevent deep attachment from forming or ensure they're not fully invested if abandonment occurs. Cheating serves this preemptive function perfectly. By maintaining other connections, they ensure they're never completely vulnerable to one person's decision to stay or leave. If their primary partner abandons them, they won't be left alone and devastated. They'll have other options immediately available. The infidelity functions as an insurance policy against the pain of abandonment. This strategy also includes unconscious sabotage. Some part of the dismissive avoidant knows their cheating might eventually be discovered, and that discovery will likely end the relationship. But ending the relationship through their own choices and behaviors feels more tolerable than being abandoned or rejected. They maintain control over the inevitable ending by ensuring they cause it rather than experiencing it as something done to them. Their nervous system prefers the pain of destroying something through their own actions to the pain of having it destroyed by someone else's choice. There's a sense of agency and control in self-sabotage that doesn't exist in being left. They'd rather be the villain who ruins things than the victim who gets hurt. This pattern often manifests through increasingly careless infidelity as relationships deepen. The dismissive avoidant might become less cautious about hiding their affairs, leave obvious evidence, or engage in behaviors almost guaranteed to be discovered. This carelessness isn't random. It's their unconscious mind attempting to force the ending they fear is inevitable anyway, but on their terms rather than their partners'. The tragedy of this preemptive strike strategy is that it creates the very abandonment it aims to protect against. By cheating, they ensure their partner will eventually leave or lose trust, manifesting their worst fear through their own defensive behaviors. They never discover whether their partner would have stayed loyal and present through natural relationship challenges because they create insurmountable challenges through betrayal. Their emotional illiteracy prevents recognition of consequences. The sixth driver of dismissive avoidant infidelity involves their profound emotional illiteracy, a limited capacity to recognize, understand, and predict emotional experiences in themselves and others. This isn't intellectual limitation, but rather psychological defense. Their nervous system learned early that emotions are dangerous, unreliable, or overwhelming, so they developed a cognitive style that minimizes emotional consideration in favor of logical rationalization. This emotional illiteracy manifests as genuine difficulty, anticipating how their infidelity will affect their partner or even themselves. They can intellectually know that cheating causes pain, but they don't emotionally grasp the depth, duration, or nature of that pain in a way that influences their behavior. The suffering remains abstract rather than viscerally real, allowing them to proceed with actions they might avoid if they truly understood the consequences. Their psychology frames infidelity primarily through their own needs and experiences. They focus on how it serves their psychological functions, providing validation, maintaining autonomy, distributing dependence, without deeply considering the human cost to others. This isn't malicious sociopathy, but rather defensive self-focus that has become their default mode of operating in relationships. The dismissive avoidant often experiences genuine surprise when their infidelity is discovered and causes significant pain. Despite intellectually knowing betrayal hurts, they didn't emotionally anticipate the actual devastation their partner experiences. They thought their partner would react more calmly, would understand their perspective, would be able to compartmentalize the infidelity as they do. The gap between their expectation and reality reveals their emotional illiteracy. This pattern extends to their own emotional experiences. Dismissive avoidants often don't recognize the emptiness, loneliness, or dissatisfaction driving their infidelity. They experience vague restlessness or boredom, but don't connect these feelings to unmet emotional needs or attachment wounds. Instead, they attribute their discomfort to their relationship lacking something, justifying seeking fulfillment elsewhere without examining their own contribution to the dynamic. Their emotional illiteracy also prevents them from recognizing when they're hurting. They might feel anxiety, irritability, or depression stemming from the internal conflict between their actions and their values, but they don't identify these feelings clearly enough to use them as signals to change behavior. Instead, they might intensify the very behaviors causing their discomfort, creating a cycle of self-harm they cannot recognize or interrupt. The absence of guilt that enables continuation. The seventh and perhaps most troubling driver of dismissive avoidant infidelity involves their limited experience of guilt or remorse about their betrayal. While people with other attachment styles who cheat typically experience significant internal conflict, shame, and guilt that either prevents infidelity or limits its duration, dismissive avoidants often report remarkably little emotional discomfort about their deception. This absence of guilt doesn't indicate they're sociopathic or lack conscience entirely. Rather, their psychological defenses are so sophisticated that they prevent guilt from arising strongly enough to change behavior. They employ multiple rationalization strategies that neutralize potential guilt before it can influence their choices. Their primary rationalization involves minimizing the significance of their infidelity. They tell themselves it doesn't mean anything, that it's just physical or just emotional, but not both, that it doesn't affect their feelings for their partner. By categorizing their betrayal as insignificant, they prevent guilt from emerging proportional to the actual harm they're causing. A second rationalization blames their partner or the relationship. They focus on ways their partner has disappointed them, needs they feel aren't being met, or problems in the relationship that justify seeking fulfillment elsewhere. By framing themselves as the victim of an inadequate relationship, they transform potential guilt into self-righteous justification. A third rationalization involves viewing their partner as less emotionally sophisticated or aware than themselves. They might see their partner as naive, overly emotional, or trapped in conventional thinking about relationships. This superiority stance allows them to dismiss their partner's perspective and the pain their betrayal would cause if discovered. These rationalizations work because the dismissive avoidance psychology is organized to protect them from emotional experiences that might threaten their defensive structure. Guilt would require acknowledging they're hurting someone they care about, which would require admitting they care enough for it to matter, which would require confronting their emotional dependence. The entire chain of emotional recognition threatens their self-concept, so it gets interrupted through rationalization. The limited guilt also stems from their compartmentalization abilities. When they're with their partner, they're not actively thinking about or feeling their infidelity. When they're engaged in affairs, they're not connecting emotionally to their partner's trust and vulnerability. The psychological splitting prevents guilty feelings from arising in contexts where they might influence behavior. How their infidelity differs from other attachment styles. Understanding why dismissive avoidants cheat most requires distinguishing their pattern from infidelity in other attachment styles. Each attachment pattern produces different motivations, patterns, and experiences of infidelity that reveal underlying psychological wounds and defenses. Anxious attachment style infidelity typically stems from desperate need for validation, fear of abandonment, or impulsive response to perceived rejection. When anxious individuals cheat, they often experience intense guilt, fear of discovery, and emotional turmoil. Their infidelity usually occurs during relationship crises, when they feel their partner pulling away, and it functions as a test of whether they can survive alone or an attempt to make their partner jealous enough to recommit. Fearful avoidant infidelity emerges from their simultaneous terror of abandonment and intimacy. They want connection, but fear being hurt, creating chaotic patterns where they might cheat as sabotage when relationships become too close, or as reassurance when they fear abandonment. Their infidelity produces significant internal conflict, because they can access both their desire for loyalty and their fear-driven impulses toward betrayal. Secure attachment individuals rarely engage in sustained patterns of infidelity. When secure people cheat, it's typically situation-specific rather than pattern-based, arising from unaddressed relationship problems, major life transitions, or circumstances that temporarily overwhelm their usual values. They experience profound guilt and typically either confess quickly or end the infidelity because the internal conflict becomes unbearable. Dismissive avoidants differ from all these patterns. Their infidelity is strategic rather than impulsive, sustained rather than situational, and produces minimal internal conflict. They don't cheat in response to relationship crises, but rather as ongoing relationship management. They don't experience intense guilt-driving confession because their rationalizations successfully neutralize potential remorse. Their pattern is most similar to a lifestyle choice rather than a mistake or crisis response. The statistical reality that dismissive avoidants cheat more than other attachment styles emerges from this difference. While someone with anxious attachment might cheat once or twice in moments of desperate insecurity, dismissive avoidants might maintain ongoing patterns of infidelity across their entire adult life. While fearful avoidants might cheat and then feel so guilty they confess and end it, dismissive avoidants might never confess and see no reason to end behavior that serves their psychological needs. The devastating impact and path forward. The final crucial element in understanding dismissive avoidant infidelity involves recognizing both its devastating impact on partners and what would need to change for different outcomes. Partners of dismissive avoidants who cheat experience a particularly pernicious form of betrayal trauma that compounds the normal pain of infidelity with the specific dynamics of their partner's attachment style. Discovery of dismissive avoidant infidelity often reveals a pattern rather than an incident. Partners learn they've been systematically deceived over extended periods, that their trust was exploited continuously, that their entire relationship reality was false. This revelation destroys not just the present, but retroactively taints every memory and moment they believed was genuine. The dismissive avoidance response to discovery often compounds the trauma. Rather than demonstrating remorse proportional to the harm caused, they might minimize the significance, blame their partner, or display cold detachment that leaves their partner feeling crazy for being devastated. The absence of guilt or genuine apology creates a secondary wound that can hurt more than the initial betrayal. Partners also struggle with the dismissive avoidant's typical inability to clearly explain their infidelity in emotional terms. They might offer logical explanations or cite relationship problems, but they cannot access or articulate the emotional and psychological drivers that would help their partner make sense of the betrayal. This leaves partners without the understanding or closure they need to heal. True change requires the dismissive avoidant to undertake the terrifying work of examining their attachment wounds, developing emotional literacy, learning to tolerate vulnerability, and building capacity for genuine intimacy. This process is so uncomfortable and threatening to their defensive structure that most avoid it unless forced by consequences severe enough to overcome their resistance. For partners of dismissive avoidance, understanding these dynamics provides crucial information for making informed decisions about whether to stay or leave, whether to trust promises of change, and how to protect themselves from ongoing harm. The reality is that loving a dismissive avoidant who cheats often means choosing between accepting ongoing betrayal or leaving someone who cannot provide the fidelity and intimacy healthy relationships require.